Hi, it's Terry D-Lab. The purpose of this video is to clarify the instructions for installing a post-phase inverter master volume control into the Fender Bassman. Now I know that in my past videos I referenced the instructions that Triode Electronics has for the kit that they sell. And that kit will usually work in most amps, but in the Fender Bassman there are a few things that you need to change, and there's some items on their instructions and the pictures that Triode shows that are not very clear. So I'm going to clarify that so that you have a successful installation of that kit if you decide to do it to your Bassman. So here's my latest Fender Bassman with the post inverter master volume installed. Here's the pot, which is in the place of the old AC accessory socket. Alright, and then of course we have the wiring going to the grid caps, so on and so forth. In my previous video where I showed step-by-step instructions how to put in the master volume, I had some people email and say, hey, what's that additional blue cap there? And another guy emailed and said, hey, I thought that some of those Bassmans had the balance type of bias circuit rather than an adjustable bias circuit. And yes, that's what the Bassmans routinely have. So yes, you do have to change the configuration of the bias circuit. And there's other things that you need to know, some critical things, like the wiring between these grid caps and the tubes, and using the proper shielded cable. So let me take you through this thing a little more detailed, and we'll cover those items. Alright, step one is to make an adapter plate that replaces that old AC outlet and allows you to mount this dual pot. Now this pot is a dual 250K linear pot. Okay, you can buy these for a couple dollars from Alpha. That's the type that I use. And if you look right in here, you can see that there are two 2.2 meg resistors that are tucked in here underneath of the terminals of the pot. Okay, I do that because I don't want them to stick up and hit your cabinet or short to the surface here of the metal, right? The other thing you really got to be careful of is make sure that you mount the pot off center so that these terminals cannot contact the chassis, because if it contacts the chassis, you're going to have a disaster on your hands. The other critical item is use shielded cable from where the grid resistors output the signal to the pot and then over to the grids of the tubes. And then that shielded cable needs to have the negative bias that's actually feeding the pot going to the shields. Okay, now this cable is some Belden 8451 dual conductor shielded cable, but you can do the same thing using RG174 coax. You just have a few more shields to hook up. Alright, let's take a look at the changes to the bias circuit. They're pretty minor. If you take a look at the Fender AA763 schematic, you will see the same bias circuit. So you got a 10K pot, a 15K resistor going to ground, and this is an added cap. Alright, so this is a 33 microfarad 160 volt. Make sure to put the positive to ground because it's negative bias. The wire here simply goes over to the diode, and then the output of the pot now goes through this blue wire to your master volume pot. Another quick note is this amp at one time had a master volume pot installed. It used to sit right here, and I have been told that that is a common location for the pot. But if you were to take a look at the logistics here, putting the pot here rather than over here, take a look at your wire lengths, right? So yes, we pop off those grid caps, go to the pot, but then we only have about a 6-inch lead that hits the output tubes. Whereas if you put it all the way over here, you're going to have at least 2 feet, if not more, of wire, which could induce noise. So that covers the mechanical installation of the pot, wiring, etc. But I've had some of you say, hey Terry, that schematic that Triode has is kind of vague, and the pictures are kind of hard to see and tell exactly how to route things. So I have recreated that schematic for you guys. Alright, so let's cut to that and we'll walk through it, and it should be as plain as day how to install this kit successfully. So here is D-Lab's simplified version of the hookup diagram for the Master Volume modification for the Fender Bassman. Okay? Now the reason that I'm specifying this is for the Bassman is because the bias circuit that you see in the typical Bassman is a balance adjustment. On their schematics they reference it as a hum balance. Okay? So it's not a true negative bias adjustable circuit. It actually just kind of pans the negative voltage across these two tubes until you get good balance with minimum hum. That circuit will not work with this Master Volume modification. So what you have to do is change your bias circuit to be what you see here, which was derived from the Fender AA763 circuit. Okay, so this is a normal negative bias adjustable circuit. You got your 10K pot. This line here goes over to the diode board. Got Mr. 15K to ground. The output normally would go over here to the resistors across the grid caps, but that's all gone now. Okay, now the negative bias goes through this new dual 250K pot, and that feeds the grids of the output tubes. Okay, so the things that you really need to know here, number one is the routing of these signals is critical. You need to use shielded cable or you're going to have hum. You also need to ensure that G1, which is the grid signal from this cap, is going through the pot to what's called G3, which goes to V1. Okay, that's why I color coded these. So make sure to keep them in that order, because if you don't, you'll have feedback issues with your amp and you won't be able to adjust the bias. Alright, so pay attention to that. The other thing that's critical is the shield of this cable, in this case the Belden 8451, needs to hook to the negative bias line. So that negative bias voltage is on that shield. You do not connect that to chassis. Okay, it'd be a disaster if you do. Alright, the other thing about that cable is on the other side where it's going to G1, G2, and where it's going to the grids of the output tubes, you do not ground that side. You insulate those shields with, say, some heat shrink tubing. Okay, so I've got some notes over here that'll help you with that. And the other thing is, if you don't want to use this Belden cable, you can use RG174 coax. Okay, same deal, but instead of having just 2 shields to land here, you're going to have 4. Alright, so if you have any questions about the installation of this kit, you can give me a message through YouTube or shoot me an email. But this diagram is pretty simplistic, and if you follow this, you'll have success. Well, I hope the information in this video helps to clarify the proper installation for those Master Volume kits. I may have left some things out in the past, and I don't want to set you guys up for failure. So normally, if you were to install that kit in your typical Marshall and Fender that has that little variable bias circuit, you'll have no issue. But when you get into these other amps that have the hum balance type bias circuit, you have to make some changes. So that's why I presented this video, and of course that schematic that I'm providing you should be a nice tool for any amp that you decide to install the kit in. So D-Lab's here for you. Free tech tips. Can't beat it. See you again.